Do you ever have trouble trying to figure out which chords to put together or how to put them in order in chord progressions in your song? Today I'm going to show you one easy trick on how to use functions in order to write better chord progressions. Hi, I'm Brian from Unmute Your Muse TV, where we teach 5-minute masterclasses for songwriters. We use the gold song solution to help you write songs that people will love, buy, and tell their friends about. So in our lesson last week, we talked about the basics of functions, how they're derived from scales, and how they talk about how the different chords within any given key can kind of work in a different way, kind of analogous to how positions on a sports team might be. Like each position has a certain set of tendencies and responsibilities and stuff that it would normally be doing in different circumstances, which is not to say that any position has to do this exact one thing every single time. It's just an analogy saying that chords tend to have these kinds of behaviors that they usually have, or a feeling that they usually give off. And we're going to be diving a little more deeply in today into exactly how each of these different functions work and how they tend to work together and how they tend to make people feel and the different amounts of tension within them and how they can be used to resolve and convey your own emotional ideas. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now let's just do a really quick review, but if you haven't seen the video from last week, go check that out first. It's called What the F Are Functions, but we're going to do a real quick review right now. So we're just talking in the terms of a major key. There are different functions that work if you're in a minor key, and we're only dealing with triads, meaning chords that are only 3 notes, a 1, a 3, and a 5. There are ways, and we'll talk about this in another video, how you can include the 7th and maybe even move beyond that a little bit. But the idea here is that if you build a chord off of each of the notes in a major scale, you're going to get different kinds of chords that build up. So if you take a major scale and you build a little triad off the first note in any key, it's going to give you a major chord. And we're going to use capital letters for any of the major chords. If you build a triad off the second note in any major scale, it's going to give you a minor chord. We're going to use lowercase letters for the minor chords. Same thing. 3rd is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished. That means it has a flat 3 and a flat 5. So today we're going to add one bonus piece of information just to differentiate things a little bit. If you were to make the 5 chord a 7th chord, it wouldn't be a fully major chord. The 7th would actually be flat, and so that's another name for that is a dominant chord. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. If we were in the key of C and we wrote the 5 chord out, it would be G, and the letters would be G, B, D, F. G normally has an F sharp in it, so it's a flat 7. And the way that we're going to write that is to put a 7, just like you would for any dominant chord. So a 5 chord in any major key is actually a dominant chord. If you just use the triad, you can just use a major triad, because that's the same thing between major and dominant. But if you're going to write the whole way out to a 7th chord, then 5 is going to be 7, which is different than the 1 chord and the 4 chord, which are truly major chords. We're going to be using this just to show how the 5 chord has some more inherent tension in it than the other chords do. So what we're going to do now is move to the piano so you can hear some of these examples, and I'm going to talk through how the different amounts of tension within each of these functions can be used to write some pretty cool chord progressions. All right, now just like we did a couple lessons ago when we were talking about the different amounts of tension within the notes that you can use in a scale for a melody, so now when we're using the chords within a key, we're going to put these in order from the least amount of natural tension to the most natural tension. And again, we're just going to be using the key of C major and the chords that derive from that just to keep things simple. Okay, so here we go. Obviously, in the key of C, a C major chord is going to be sounding, the most stable. It doesn't need to go anywhere. It's the home note. This is where everything wants to come back to eventually in the long run. Now, very similar to a C major, or to the 1 chord, is the 6th chord. Now, the 6th chord is what we call the relative minor. And if you notice, it has 2 of the same of the 3 notes. It still has the C and the E in it. This is that now we're thinking of A as the home note. And in a lot of ways, you can think of this as just an alternate version of the root chord, an alternate version of 1. It's just minor. It can function in a lot of the same ways, where this still feels very settled. We're still hearing a lot of the notes that, it still has those 2 notes in it. Our ears still feel this as home. It's just a dark version of home. It's like the bizarro version of home, something like that. Up next with what we would say is like a middling amount of tension are the 2 chord and the 4 chord. So in the key of C, D minor is 2, and that feels like that can just resolve back to 1, or sometimes the 2 chord will jump to one of the more tension-filled chords like a 5 before it gets back to one of the settled chords like 1. So a 2-5-1 chord progression is like the most standard thing in all of jazz music, and a lot of the derivatives thereof. Okay, that's pretty nice. The 4 works the same way. 4 can just go straight back to 1 now, with no problem. But it can also go to one of those more tension-filled notes like the 5 before it gets back to a 1. It can kind of bounce around anyway. All right, now there are 2 chords within the major functions that have a fair bit of tension built into them naturally, and that would be the 5 chord and the 7 chord. A couple different reasons for that. Let's break it down. So in the key of C, the 5 chord is G, and like I said at the introduction, we're going to be turning this one into a 7th chord, so we get the flat 7, which is F natural here. Okay, a couple different pieces of information here. For one thing, within this chord, we have a tritone, which is the darkest interval that you can get. I should probably do an entire episode about why this is such a dark thing. In the Middle Ages, Christian theologians outlawed using this interval as such in some respects because they just said it was too dark. It made people think of Satan. But it has that built into the middle of the chord. So there's a lot of tension just right there between those two. And those two really, 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 really want to resolve in opposite directions by a half step back to our C and E. So this is like tension and resolution. People have written doctor's theses on why this works so well, which it does. Okay, so that the G dominant chord has that built into it. Sounds beautiful. Now the B diminished chord is kind of just the same, like if you're only going to be using the triad, it still has that tritone interval built into it, and it still has the B and the F that want to resolve back to C. So if you're thinking of the B as the root, it still is just another tension, wants to resolve. Now remember how we said that the 6th chord can kind of be a substitute for the 1 chord? So anytime that you've got a tension chord that wants to resolve back to a resolved chord, you can go to the 6 instead of the 1. So you can have a 5 go to 6. And that's still, like, you still get that resolution. This is now you're thinking of the A as the home note. 5 to 6. And it works just as well going from 7 to 6. Cool. Now, the one oddball chord that I haven't talked about yet is the 3 chord. Some people love this, some people hate it. It's a little bit of controversy because it can kind of swing both ways. So in the key of C, the 3 chord is E minor. So it has the 7th of the key in it. So your ears are still hearing C as home because that's the key that we're in. So it kind of really just wants to resolve up a half step. So you can kind of think of this as kind of a tension chord that can resolve back to the 1 chord or the 6. But it's also has the other 2 notes are the stable ones from within the key of C. So it almost can kind of feel like a home note. So this note creates a little bit of tension. These 2 feel really settled. It can kind of swing both ways. You can honestly almost throw an E minor or a 3 chord into any part of any progression and make it work. Now, as you're studying these functions, don't let it limit you as to thinking that there's a certain way that things have to go, that, like a 5 chord always has to resolve to a 1 or a 6. It doesn't. It can go anywhere you want, just so long as you like the way it sounds. The whole point of studying these is just to give you a little bit of a shortcut. So, if you understand the stuff that we went over today, then you know where the most inherent tension naturally lies, and then you can take advantage of that as you're writing your chord progressions. Now, there are 1,000 different ways that you can adapt these in different ways and use them in all sorts of different contexts. But in the end, the only rule that really matters is, do you like the way it sounds? Is it getting across the feeling and the idea that you want it to get across? So, let me know if you have any questions. Hop in on the Facebook group. Send me an email if you've got questions. I love talking about this kind of stuff. We're going to do some more on functions, some more advanced stuff later on down the road. And let me know how you're using this. If you have an example of something you've used some of this in some of your writing, it would be great to share. So stick that in the Facebook group. And I will see you guys around.